Hello, good people. My name is Linda Little. I am the president and CEO at Neighborhood Service Organization, affectionately known in the community of Detroit, Michigan as NSO. Welcome to our very first edition of The Silent Majority, a podcast that brings forward the voices of the people in the community, the power of the people, we the people. That is who we represent. And today, we're focused on our campaign called Don't Touch Me, which is a campaign that's focused on preventing child abuse and changing systems that prevent justice for children and helping to advocate for every child's right, their constitutional right to be protected from harm. Today, we have joining us a very special guest who's been a long-term supporter of NSO and a father, a veteran, a native Detroiter who really cares about people and wants to elevate his platform to support and have an impact in our country as a U.S. Senator. His name is Adam Ollier, and I want to welcome you to today's podcast.
Thanks, Linda. It's good to be here.
Thank you. It's so important that you are our first guest today because when I became president and CEO here at NSO 7 years ago, can you believe it's been 7 years?
No, I can't.
You were a real advocate in helping to support the work that we're doing in the Michigan legislature and really advancing the voices of the people that we serve. So we appreciate you so much. So it's fitting that you're our first guest here today.
I'm glad to be here.
So did you know, Adam, that every 9 minutes a child is sexually abused in the country?
I didn't know that it was every 9 minutes. I knew that it was way too much, and I know that we aren't doing anywhere near enough to address this challenge. I think the thing that I did know is that it's often by somebody that you know and trust, and I think the way we live in this world, I have little kids, right? You know, not too dissimilar to yourself, right? I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son, and the way our generation has been raised is this idea that some stranger is gonna grab your kid in a van or do some of those other kind of things, when the reality is they never have access to our children, and we have taken away kind of the go out in the world and play, and have moved to this space where we are hovering over our children and constantly feel
helicopter parents.
Yeah, you know, we need to be watching them, but it's not working. And I think that is an important part of the discussion, is that, you know, when we talk about any level of sexual violence, it is not some person when you're walking down the street or whatever. It's somebody you know and trust.
That's right. Actually, researchers say that about 76% of abusers are family members, parents, uncles, aunts, cousins, people who are close to the child. And many people have this misconception that it only happens in impoverished communities. But in fact, there was a study done by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, and they studied about 17,000 people who had childhood trauma. All of them were college educated, and 70% of them were Caucasian. So they were middle to upper class, and they had, you know, 1 in 3 had suffered childhood trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I played football in college, and we had a presentation by a professor from Alfred University, and he was talking about violence against women as a men's issue, and that's not the way it's normally framed. You know, it's like a women's issue, and he was like, "Look, man, the overwhelming majority of violence against women, sexual assault being, you know, key amongst that, is perpetrated by a man." He's like, "If y'all stop doing it, this problem would go away," and you don't realize how impactful it is, right? And so he was like, you know, a third of all women have been sexually assaulted, especially, you know, those who are college educated in college in this space. And he was like, and if you don't believe me, go home, call your mom, talk to your girlfriend, talk to your sisters. And I have a mom, I have sisters. At the time I had a girlfriend, today I have a wife. They're not the same person. But in that moment, I talked to my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, can you believe what this man said? And she was like, yes. I was sexually assaulted when I was, you know, a child, right? Like before she was an adult. And her mom did not believe her, right? Like those things happened, and it was traumatic. And I was You know, I'm a righteous indignation kind of person. If you don't
We know.
if you don't know that about me, I was an RA, so I was like, from then on, every board I had was like, don't be the one, like, don't let this thing happen, right? Like, this is unacceptable. Like, sexual assault, sexual violence is a thing. It is a thing that we are the problem, right? Like, it is not something that this happens. In addition to this, I'm a captain in the Army, and I literally just had to do the sexual harassment, assault, rape prevention training for my unit. And normally these things are boring. And when I say boring, it is like, here is 300 slides that you need to do in this 1 hour of mandatory training. And everyone is like, what are we? And I was like, look, guys, I am not doing these slides, right? Like, I have these slides. If y'all aren't paying attention, I will give you these slides. And in the Army, they always talk about death by PowerPoint. And I was like, I'm not doing it. And so at some point, I was like, all right, guys, everybody stand up, right? Or I had all the women stand up. And so I had all the women stand up, and I counted them off 1 and 3. And I was like, look, the data suggests that 1 in 3 women is going to be sexually assaulted at this point. And, you know, we had them standing up, and I was like, look, we aren't taking care of our buddies, right? Like, this is our responsibility. Then I had the dudes stand up, and I had them count off 1 to 5. And so I had that 1 in 5 man sit down. And then I have all these other men, you know, which would be the 4 out of 5 men. I was like, look, we are not doing enough to take care of our people. So either we take care of them or we don't. But the problem is us. Because if 1 in 5 men is getting sexually assaulted, if 1 in 3 women is getting sexually assaulted, that 2 in the 3, that 4 in the 5,
Yes.
they are the ones doing the assaulting or letting the assaulting happen. And so as we talk about this moment and why I'm grateful to be here with you is because the number of people who are in the like, hey, I'm not being actively assaulted, are also not saying that they are actively preventing their buddy from doing that thing.
That's right.
And that's the challenge.
That's right. That you nailed it. That's it. Altogether.
Oh, well, that was pretty quick.
And that's why. Well, that's why we exist. That's why the Don't Touch Me movement was founded, because you know, your girlfriend at the time, nobody listened to her. Nobody came to support her or protect her. And we're seeing that play out in the media over and over and over again. Naziah Harris, you know, so devastating what happened. And her family reached out for help. And the system failed her. You know, the young lady at Cornerstone Academy who was repeatedly raped by the security guard. The school even reported it. And for months, nothing happened to protect this young lady. And there's countless stories over and over across the country. And so this Don't Touch Me movement is really around bringing the community together. People like you, me, the 4 and the 2. And by the way, you're number 1, I'm number 2. Number 3 is our listeners. So one of us will be sexually assaulted or abused or have been. That's astonishing. Dr. Robert Block was the chair of the American Academy of Pediatricians and said that the number 1 unaddressed public health crisis in America is childhood trauma. Childhood trauma. And we don't hear about that. There's that study that I mentioned between Kaiser Permanente and the CDC. It's called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And, you know, we don't hear enough about that. I think the only state that has mandated this assessment is California, where they had their first Surgeon General, Nadine Burke Harris, who is a pediatrician and really became a champion of this issue. I'd love to have her on the podcast too. And so these gaps in the system that caused children to fall through the cracks is why we exist. We want to put reforms in place to help buttress the system and support children. And one of the ways that we want to do that is to require training of law enforcement, investigators, the judiciary, people involved in supporting the children in these cases. Can you believe there's no required training? That there are people handling these investigations, doing interviews of children, making decisions about the lives of the child, of perpetrators, and they don't understand age-specific response to trauma and what abuse looks like for children? That's a simple thing to fix, right?
Nothing's a simple thing to fix, but I think this is work that people have been trying to say is a problem, right? So the Children's Center have been working on things, these kind of things, and when you talk to them, they have these forensic, not interrogators, but like they have these people who do these forensic interviews with children who have been the victims of terrible things. And you're like, how do you do this? How do you, like, I would not want to know, right? Like, I would not want to hear any of those kind of things. So it takes a special person to be, one, able to internalize or to take in that information. And I think for a lot of people, it's too easy to believe that it's not happening, or that, you know, that would never happen to them, that the person that they know or love would never hurt someone that they care about in this way. And so it becomes difficult. And I think the reason that children are always a target for this is because it's hard for children to talk about these kind of things, and they are made to feel like they were to blame, that they did the thing. Because we live in a culture where it's very common and easy to blame victims, right? I wish I could say we were at a space where even adult women are no longer being blamed for rape, but there is always someone like, well, did you see what she was wearing? And you're like, no, it doesn't matter. Like, that's not how this thing goes.
That's right.
And with children are like, well, what did I say? What did I do that brought this thing into me? And you're like, you did nothing. You've never done anything, and you should not feel shameful for this thing. No one feels shameful if somebody runs up and hits them in the back of the head with a bat. And so, like, we have a cultural shift here because we do not feel like it is our responsibility to protect everyone's kids, right? You're like, my kid. I protect my kid. And that would also be okay, except the responsibility is to say that this is an unacceptable thing and no one gets to do this in our community, right? Like, not just to my kid or to your kid, but no one gets to do this. And that's where we need to be working towards.
And you can only protect your kid to the point and extent that they're with you. So if your kid plays sports, if you're divorced, which our divorce rate is over 50% now in this country, if your kid is involved in church activities or other activities, you're not with your child 100% of the time. So there's coaches, there's all kinds of folks that come into contact with children who sometimes prey on them. This is a fact. This isn't just something we're saying here. And so one of the best things we can do for children, would you agree, is to believe them? That's what it sounds like you're saying.
I think it's even more than believe them, right? Like, it's, yes, believe them and raise them in a way that they understand that it is unacceptable for this thing to happen, right? To say, hey, someone should ask your permission, right? Like, I'm not just running up on you and be like, hey, Linda, do you want a hug? Do you want, you're like, we're not doing that, right? Like, the thing is, like, this is an appropriate way for someone to interact with you. They can say hello. Your cousin can give you a hug when you are talking to this person. But, like, some random person you don't know should not just be running up on you and giving you a hug and kissing you in the face, right? Like, that's weird and unacceptable, no matter where,
And that's one of the things that we have on our website, don'ttouchme.wiki, is resources, videos that are appropriate for children at different age categories, for parents. The parents can decide which videos to show their kids to educate them about safe and unsafe touching and tell them what to do, the protect yourself rules. I remember as a kid, we used to have PSAs, public service announcements, to talk about these things. Today, we don't have that. And so we have to be diligent as parents to educate our children and let them know those things, just like you're saying.
I think it's also important behavior to model appropriate behavior with other people, right? Of like, I might come in and I'm like, Linda's my friend. I'm going to give Linda a hug because I know her and I know that is a relationship we have. But your kids don't know that is a relationship that you have, and like understanding of like, hey, this is why we talk in this way. This is where it is appropriate to touch, right? Like, this is who, this is thing. And I think also, from a gender standpoint, right? Like, I think there's some people who are like, well, I'm a man, I hug women, I don't hug men. Or I'm a woman, I hug men, and I don't hug, like it can get, I don't want to say it can get weird, but it is a very complicated thing for people to learn and understand and to manage, and it's a constantly changing environment. And I think one benefit is I think young people are getting and having more conversations about consent at every level, where they're like, hey, these are what my lines are. These are how I would like you to interact with me, and having our children and understand that, but also talking to them about like, hey, these are not places where you should be touching anyone. No one should be touching you here.
Anything covered by your swimsuit should never be touched by another person that you're not comfortable with.
Well, I mean,
period.
now we have to have a conversation about swimsuit sizes because
That's a totally different conversation. Well, I could say, the name of this campaign came from one of the Protect Yourself videos where the cartoon child is telling the other children that supposedly are watching that they should tell the person, don't touch me, and then run and tell an adult. But also the women in our shelter, we have a women's shelter. And I think I've shared that the number one reason that women and children suffer housing instability is because of domestic abuse. So many of the women in our shelter, almost 100%, have experienced abuse. And if someone goes to touch them, you hear them. You can walk through our shelter today and you'll hear, don't touch me. If we have guests or visitors, we know not to do that, to reach out and touch them. But that is something that is said over and over by people who have been abused because that discomfort with the touch is triggering. And so the name of this campaign is intended to honor the respect of your body and the position that the people's personal space so that they can be free from that violation. Don't touch me is a serious name, and it's intended to evoke emotion. So let me ask you a question, because most states have policies and laws in place about, child protective service agencies, when to do investigations, the time frame of investigations. And here in Michigan, they have 30 days. And so what happens is the child, they take the report and then they have to do the investigation. Well, during that time, the child could still be interacting with the abuser, still have to, that trauma, they're being re-traumatized for 30 days. So one of the things that we'd like to do or like to see put in place is that there's an immediate safety plan. If a child has physical evidence of abuse or they disclose abuse, that we put a safety plan in place to keep the child away from that alleged abuser while the investigation is occurring. And in that time, they can have therapists engaged with the child so that the child can have some support to process what is happening to him or her. What are your thoughts about that?
I think we need to do everything we can to try and make sure the children are safer in these spaces. And I think as we look forward into these moments, having a good plan on how you do that is really important, right? Like trying to get folks the kind of services and the space is really important. I think there's always this concern that folks have, like, well, people are not getting falsely accused, right? Like the likelihood that you falsely accuse someone is so astronomically low. The amount of time, effort, work it takes to stand up and say, hey, this person who you trust, who I trusted, has done this thing, like that's super difficult, right? The underreportment rate is so incredibly high that I think it's really important that we lean in on protecting someone in these spaces and figuring out the right way. So like on something like that, it's like, all right, to be able to go with the prosecutor, the police, the therapist, and say, hey, we're going to put together a plan and figure that out. I think that's really important. I think that could be a really successful strategy, because what it's not saying is, okay, you were accused of this thing, now you go to prison now or whatever. It's saying, hey, this child, whether they were or were not, must believe that something happened. Yeah. And so let's figure out what it takes to get them to a space where they are safe, and maybe that child did misunderstand the thing. And that's the best case scenario, is that maybe the child somehow misconstrued or didn't understand what happened, and no harm, no foul. But the worst case scenario is you are putting a kid in an environment for 30 days with someone who has every reason, incentive, and commitment to making that kid change their mind, to say something different, to continue to be abused into that space, and to be, for that person to say, hey, you asked for this, you wanted this, the reason this happened is because you did whatever, I would never have, that's not helpful, and it certainly isn't good for that child.
Absolutely, and or say nothing and just torment the child. You know, I've had stories told to me since we've launched this campaign. All kinds of people have come out and shared. In one scenario, the person told me when they were younger, because these are adults who suffer childhood trauma that have really come out, is that they cut their doll's hair. They did things like hurt their stuffies that they loved the most. They didn't say anything directly, but they sent the message that you better not talk. So psychologically, to a child, it invokes fear, and it helps them it prevents them from speaking out. So if, to your point, if a child says, I'm being abused by this person who's supposed to love me, that they probably love, either it happened, they misunderstood, and if they did make it up, as some people might say that they're making up a story or they're being coached to say these things, then there is an issue there too that's harmful to the child. So why wouldn't we take a pause? You know, like we do in healthcare when if we see that every failure mode, we pause to make sure everything's in place that should be in place. Pause, protect the child first. Get the child an immediate safety plan, and investigate what happened. That's all we're asking for. Let's put the interest of the children first. So from your legislative experience, what would it take to get something like the required training and the immediate safety plan?
A lot.
A lot.
Right? And here's why. Change is hard, and especially in this space, it's hard, right? And it's hard for a variety of reasons, right? Like no one has good data on how pervasive this issue is because we know that it's being undercounted. And I think it's also hard for people to grapple with the idea that this is in fact happening and that it is happening by people who you know, right? Like if we had an issue where, you know, kids walking down the street and were getting pulled into vans, that's easy. We'll make that illegal, you know, tomorrow. But if you're like, I want to make it a situation, you know, there are going to be some people who are going, oh, well, this is just another way to take kids from parents. And they're going to do this to black families or poor families more than anyone else. It's not going to happen to those wealthy families. So, you know, you're going to hear those kind of things. And the reality is, I hate to say it, but these things happen and you get the fixes when there's an incredible tragedy. That's what you saw. I remember a couple of years ago, there was Vanessa Gurey. She was a private at Fort Hood, and I'm sure I'm butchering her name, but you know, she was a private at Fort Hood and she disappeared. And she didn't go for a walk and not show up, but she had been reporting harassment from, you know, up her chain of command. And this is a grown woman who is in the military, who is, you know, should be eminently capable, and was murdered after being assaulted by someone who should have been taking care of her. And it is hard for people to fathom that happens. And we have not seen the reform necessary, and I think that is appropriate in that situation. And so when you say, what does it take? I hate to say it, but it probably takes someone being, you know, shocked out of their system and to understand that this thing could happen. You never want this to happen to anybody else. But, you know, a lot of these things happen when someone who has the power and the authority and the ability to do it, to realize, one, that it's their job to do it, and two, that it needs to be their life's mission. And so, you know, we've had this conversation before. You need somebody with power who's willing to crusade, because this is a big issue that has existed for some time.
It has, and you have these stories, you know, Naziah Harris, Vanessa, you can go, all the things that have happened in the church, even, and these cross all socioeconomic sectors and all races, and we still don't have the reform that's necessary. So that's why we want organizations to come together, people who do this work, people who care about this work, the business community, because it touches every single one of us, and the public, the individuals, to come together and go to don'ttouchme.wiki, sign up to join the movement so that we can all collectively together, collective voices for change matter, right? When legislators hear the voice of constituents, it matters. And so we really need our community to come together because it needs to stop. It needs to end right now, today, with you, me, and our listeners here.
I think the other thing to say is that there has been a lot of progress made on this issue. It's just not nearly enough, right? Like, you used to not be able to send these people to prison. Like, there was, intimate partner violence didn't become a thing until recently, right? Like, the days that a man could actually beat his wife are not generations ago, right?
It's very true.
So,
like 50 years. That's very new.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's less than 50 years that a man could sexually assault his wife, right? Like, we have made some progress. We just have to remember that it's not nearly enough, that it's not going nearly fast enough. But we have had some successes. And I think I only say that to encourage people to say, we can do more because we have done some. We just have to keep going.
So it's reported that over 600,000 reported cases of child abuse occur each year. 76%, as I said, are family members, but only 20% ever see a courtroom. So the conviction rate, no, that's the courtroom rate, is 20%. The conviction rate is even less than that.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of people who prey on children who are allowed to perpetuate that behavior. And when you get into Congress, because you will,
I appreciate that. Say that.
what can you do in that seat to help?
I mean, I think it's important to recognize that how far we have to go, right? Like, the Violence Against Women Act is up for renewal, and they're talking about gutting those things. I think it is about being a champion for a group that doesn't have champions and talking about all the things that are going to be necessary to make this thing work. And I'm going to be that, and we'll continue to do everything we can to move the ball forward in very real and meaningful ways. And there are lots of things that we can do well before we get to the, hey, we're passing legislation that is going to get done. There are ways to work with local prosecutors to do these kind of things. And when I was in the state legislature, I did a similar thing with a jury task force where we worked with the courts to try and make sure that the jury pool was more fair. And the reason I bring that up is because depending upon who your jury is, makes a big difference on what justice looks like. And the more diverse we get our jury pool, the more likely you are to have people who have had these experiences to remember what it's like not to be listened to, not to be believed, not to be, this kind of thing. So you say, all right, if 1 in 3 women has been sexually assaulted by the time they're 20, right, and you have a jury with no women, and you have a sexual assault case, the likelihood that they're going to believe, these things is diminished versus if you have a jury that's 50-50 men and women,
Right.
And because then you're definitely going to have probably at least one woman who has been sexually assaulted, right? You look at the number of men who have been sexually assaulted as children, and you start to think through, all right, well, how do we get to a place where they feel comfortable talking about those things? But that is a space where there's a high level of shame. We see this again in the military where you're a grown soldier and you're being sexually assaulted by another man, and you don't want to talk about that because of what that looks like. And you think, all right, imagine you're an adult. You're willing to go fight in a war. You do all those things, and you are unwilling, unable, uncomfortable with talking about how this person who's supposed to have your back, who's supposed to help make sure that you come home alive, has been sexually assaulting you. Think about how difficult it is for a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old to form the words in their mouths to understand that. Because number one, they don't know any of these words. They don't know any of these things. They don't understand. Some of them don't understand until later on that what happened was inappropriate because that person is teaching them how to be and what you do. And they're like, this is something only you and I do. It's like, well, right? Like that's just not okay.
Yes.
But
And
it's
I
happening
think
every
that's
day.
a misconception. That is a very valid point. A lot of people assume that if a child doesn't say these things or don't say it a way that an adult would say it, that it must not be true. But think about it. If a child has never been exposed to these things before, they don't even know what to call it. Oftentimes, they don't even know that it was a bad thing until they get older and realize what it is. And so that's why the training, the age-specific, trauma-informed training is so critically important to those involved in these investigations. so they understand how children respond
Yeah.
to that, and they may still show love to the person who did it because they probably love them. And if a child is not, shying away, it's not because the abuse didn't happen. Children suppress abuse. And so they try to forget about it. They try to make it like it never happened. They just know it didn't feel good. And that is their response. And so we as adults have to recognize that. That's why I'm encouraging our listeners to go to the website, watch the videos, learn for ourselves what children respond, how people in general respond to abuse, and be equipped and armed with information and tools so that we can educate each other, educate our communities, and respond, take action right away. Tell us about your agenda, your platform, once you become a U.S. Senator.
Oh, Congressman, maybe. The reason that we're so close is because housing is the most important thing in the world to me, right? Like, we talk about housing because that is your everything, right? You talk about the women who and families who are in your shelter spaces because the person who was abusing them was the one who had housing. Yes. And so they stayed until they couldn't stay anymore and they don't have a place to go, or you're grappling with, should you stay with this abuser or should you go leave and be, housing insecure, homeless? Like, that's the real challenge that we have for everybody. Like, access to safe, affordable housing is the linchpin on everything in our society. And most people are, I won't even say a paycheck away, they are 3 paychecks behind from being homeless, right? Like,
especially today, right?
And they're trying to make these things work, and it's super difficult because we don't have enough housing. And we don't have enough housing because we haven't built anything and things are falling apart. And when you start talking about what safe looks like, it's really difficult. There are a number of folks who just can't make traditional housing work because of adverse childhood experiences, because of mental health issues, because of a variety of things, and so they need permanent supported housing. I've always been a huge fan of permanent supported housing. It's critical, right? Like, shelters are an important thing, but if your healthcare is Band-Aids, you have a problem, right? We should be doing the kind of work to make sure that folks can live safely in space. And
it's a great analogy. Band-Aids for housing. It's a shelter. It's true.
That's what people do, right? Like, and that's what we see where, you're like, okay, well, even the definition of homeless doesn't make sense. So HUD's definition of homeless is you have not been housed for 365 consecutive days.
And if you get one night in a bed, it's canceled. You gotta start all over.
Yeah, and so it's negative 20 degrees and the church lets you stay in the church, clock resets. And so when people say, hey, we're getting to a place where we have solved homelessness, no, we haven't. And we aren't even getting close. And that is the bottom of the, that is, I won't say that's the floor, but that's below the floor. That is below the standard of acceptability. When we start talking about where we need to be going, that is people being able to say, hey, they have a place that they can live in. And the reason that that's so important is because we spend all this time talking about children and schools and education, and all that's really important. But if you don't have a stable place to live, you don't have anything else, because your parents are moving 3, 4, 5 times in a semester. You can't stay in school. You can't do any of those kind of things, right? Like, you can't work if you don't have stable housing, right? Like, I know it's a movie, but people remember The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, and it's like, all right, well, if you're going to be in the shelter, you got to start standing in line at this time so that you can get a bed. And like, you can't work and do that. And
you have to have an address for your application.
And they're like, well, how do you have an address? How do you do any of these kind of things? And so it's really saying, hey, that is the thing that is actually bothering people, right? And let's fix that. And let's be single-mindedly focused on doing that. And in Detroit, you hear everyone talking about how we need more affordable housing, and that is 100% true. The thing that people don't want to talk about or are unwilling or unable to talk about is we don't have just a housing problem. People have an income problem. If they had more money, they could have housing. But they don't have more money because they don't have a job that is going to do the kind of things that are necessary to do it. And so I won't call it a chicken and an egg situation, right, as much as it is hey, we got to prioritize making sure these people can work, yes, and establish themselves in a space that makes sense, because they are not going to build stuff for people who can't afford it unless we're building permanent supported housing. And the number of permanent supported housing units is locked into the homeless population, which is locked into that, have you been without a home for 365 days? And so they'll say, well, we have built all the permanent supported housing we need. And you're like, but there are all these homeless people. And they're like, nah, they're not really homeless people. They're just in transition. I was like, well, the first day I am not under a roof. I am not in transition. I am homeless, right? Like I am. You tell me I'm sitting outside with all my stuff on the curb and 364 days later I can be homeless. Nothing sounds crazier to me.
Yeah. And we work at NSO to help people get not only housed, but get employment, get health care benefits, Social Security if they're entitled, whatever income and supports they need. And it's still extremely difficult. And once they're housed, in order for them to sustain, they need to have viable income. It's just necessary. So affordable housing is on your list. Child abuse prevention is on your list.
And child care. And so when we start talking about child care, you start talking about people who have access to your children. And there are a lot of folks who are just like, hey, can my kid be with you? I need to go to work. I need to do this thing. They don't have the opportunity or the ability to give you a rigorous background check or to do some of these kind of things. And I know everyone is always scared that the person that they go hire is going to take advantage of their children. That's not the issue. The issue is you can't afford to send your kid to childcare, to that place where everybody's had a background check, where they got all these controls and doing those things. So you have to let your kid stay with your relative who probably doesn't have who doesn't have a job, right? Like that's why that's why
they're there and can keep the kids,
right? Like they don't have, and there's a reason that some of these things exist, but they are with your kids because that's what you needed, right? And maybe they're watching 2 or 3 kids, and maybe your friend is doing the right thing, but they have an adult child, a partner, or somebody else who is abusing your children while they're over there or in space, and like that's how this stuff happens.
That's why Head Start, early childhood is so important.
All things on the chopping block under this administration, right? Like it is hugely important as we talk about these moments of getting kids in school, getting them access to affordable, safe childcare where you can watch kids, right? Like that's I have parents myself. I mean, I am a parent and I have little kids and, that's the difference, right? Like, but my kids can go spend a little bit of time in my parents' house, right? Like they live 2 blocks from us. We're able to take care. Like that's a difference maker in our lives, and it's not happening for most folks. And so if you say, all right, you got housing, you got childcare, and then the next thing is, as we were talking about income, do you have a job that's going to pay you to do the things that you need to do in space? And if not, we just continue to have trouble.
Yes. So as you eloquently just wrapped all of these issues around child abuse, this problem of protecting children or the lack thereof in our country affects everything from healthcare, because the ACEs study showed us that people who have childhood trauma are between 3 and 15 times more likely to have chronic diseases, mental health issues, substance use disorders. It also affects the ability for parents to have safe, affordable child care and places to earn and put their children so that they can earn an income. In the 40s and 50s, there were single parent homes. Now both parents work. Everybody has to work. So mom is not staying home with the kids today. And then you have, just the overall well-being of the people who are going to be running our country in just a few years. Yeah. We need them to be mentally strong and supported and stable and vibrant. We need our young people. They're our future.
We do.
So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's always great to talk to you. You're always so insightful. I'm very happy that you're going to be in our state capitol, helping to advance issues not only here in Michigan, but helping to influence our country. So thank you for your service in the military, your service to the great state of Michigan, and your support of NSO. And to our listeners, good people, we hope you learned some good information today, and we thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next time at The Silent Majority.